This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so you heard the message. Yes, this is a little different. GoToMeeting has changed its look and feel, and that's why it's taking me a little bit of time to find everything, even though I've studied this. Being live is a little bit different than just testing. One of the things that you will notice, well, maybe I'm not sure what what you see in your view as you look at it, but one new thing that's available here is drawing tools. And if I click that you can draw, you should see a drawing either menu or option that shows up that would allow you to draw. I'm going to turn that off at this point because I think we need to work with it just a little bit before we do anything else. We'll try next time, Stephen. The agenda is before you. It isn't all that long, but it might take a little bit of time to get through it. The first thing that I have here is news from Libline, and I talked with Patrick this week, and we didn't really have a large agenda to go through. I asked him primarily about the status of the ERM. If you remember, Libline had responded to an RFP that required ERM as part of the software that they received, and the software itself is in production right now. So the Coral software is in production for one of their new sites, and it is currently not connected to Bibliovation. And the reason for that is that they want to make sure that it's going to work first, that the data that is imported into Coral is something that is going to work well for them. The library itself has been in production since probably about 3 or 4 weeks now. And Patrick told me that the librarian has looking at the data that has been imported into the instance of Coral. There are somewhere between 150 and 180 entries at this point, and the librarian is going through each of them individually to determine whether or not the resource is to stay in their Coral instance. And what Patrick estimated was that they would have around 100 left when they came to the end. The sources that they are leaving out of the ERM are primarily free resources, things that they get for no money and that are open access and they don't need to keep track of. So I'll be asking Patrick about those things pretty regularly, so that
Can you hear me? Because we can't hear Becky.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, this is one difference from the last version of GoToMeeting. I could click on mute all, and all but me would be muted. And now I guess that isn't the case. Okay, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Ben, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. If you'd like to go ahead and let people know what you and Jim have been working on.
Yeah, sure. So we have been looking at the 12 enhancements that I demoed, last year. That I've started referring to as the Hartford 12. So if I use that term again, you'll know what I'm talking about. Those 12 enhancements. So Jim started working on the facets first and foremost. Ran into a couple of snags. That one's mostly done. There's a couple of little bits of things that we need to finish up on. But the one thing that he does have completely done, and it turns out to be a really small and discrete element, is the navigation bar at the top of the search results screen. And if you want, I can show you how that works and how to install it. It's a very short snippet of code.
Ben, I'm going to make you presenter.
Oh, swell, thanks. Okay, so you should be able to see my desktop, which has a picture of, well, it's got the Waldo testing sandbox on the screen with the system preference admin discovery layer preferences open. And the next thing I'm going to do, move one or two things out of the way, there we go, is I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to launch the discovery layer in configuration mode. And I am going to grab this little bit of code that I have, which is right over here, to clone this navigation bar. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to copy this text and paste it into onBib results render. So I'm just going to grab it all, copy it, and then over here, I can never find this thing. Find onBib, there it is, onBib results render, and then paste it in there. And actually, before I launch this, let me do something clever. Copy, new. So there's a sandbox, and I'm going to do a search. And looking at the search results, you can see that the navigation that is at the bottom of the list is not at the top of the list. If you check, there is nothing up my sleeves. All right. So now I've already pasted that code into on bib results render. I'm going to hit save changes. And then I'm going to go back to the sandbox and I'm going to refresh. And there it is, at the top of the screen, the navigation bar. Very fast, very simple. And the reason why I am demoing this to you is because I am looking for volunteers who are willing to put this code into their sandboxes and check it out. Don't all rush to raise your hands.
Okay, is there anyone out there who is interested in adding this to their sandbox?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so
I'm a little ambivalent because I'm not doing any testing in the sandbox. So
Oh, right.
well, if it works in the sandbox, there's nothing to prevent you from putting it in your production version.
sure.
The reason that we mention the sandbox is because it's always a good idea to test something that you're going to add in the sandbox, and if it works, then move it to the production database.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Ben, how would you like to distribute this? Just via email?
Yeah, I can take this file called top page navigation and I can either email it to people individually or I can drop it into an email and send it off to the Waldo support list.
I would suggest the Waldo support list.
Okay.
I keep all of those messages, so if somebody wants it and they don't have a copy of it, I can easily send it out again.
Good.
As can you.
Right. All right, I will. I'll do that. And if anybody wants additional help with this, up to and including create an account for me, and I'll put it in for you. Just let me know.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, and Ben, do you have an update on what else is happening with the Hartford 12?
We're slowly working through some stuff. We've sort of taken a little break. There's an enhancement. There's a part of the enhancements that we have that have to do with maps. And it used to have a little sort of thumbnail icon of the map that you were looking for on the right-hand side. In the process of doing some changes to our code, moving from one version to another, that got dropped. And so right now Jim's busy recreating that. We're pretty close to that. Once that's done, I think we'll jump back in. The things that he is closest to finishing is, as I mentioned before, the facets and well, actually maps too. As he goes through and takes a look at some of the stuff that we have, he's also finding ways to sort of like clean up, tighten up, and isolate the code so that we can divvy it out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to try to take back the controls. And I've got it. And we're right back at our agenda. Okay. Earlier this week, I did receive a message from Jane telling me that there was a new point release, numbered 6.00.18. And this point release is available in all of the sandboxes at this time. And I did update the spreadsheet, and I want to go over a couple of things with you on the spreadsheet. So let me pull it over here. And we're getting a lot of tabs in this particular spreadsheet, but I think it's worthwhile to keep it together. The spreadsheet that I belatedly sent out to you after I sent out the announcement of the meeting doesn't have the highlighting in column A. This is for me so that I can point out a couple of the fixes and the enhancements that I think you might be interested in. South Central Library System upgraded to Bibliovation in December. And what Patrick told me is that the programmer spent most of December addressing the bug fixes or the bug reports that South Central sent in, as well as working on the ERM. So pretty much all of the fixes that are on this particular tab in the spreadsheet are responding to South Central requests. And some of them may apply to what your libraries are experiencing, and some of them may not, and most of them you may never run into. So I wanted to point out a couple. For those of you who are using acquisitions, there is now the ability in your sandboxes only to create purchase order lines from a non-marked spreadsheet. And what I wanted to do, and I need to, let's see, going to go back over here. What I wanted to do was to show you where those particular capabilities show up. You first have to have a purchase order open, and I have this one that has nothing in it at this point in time. If you are creating a purchase order with multiple items attached to that purchase order, you would choose from these options how you're going to add items to the purchase order. We always have manual entry that's available from search, will allow you to search either OCLC or Library of Congress and download bibliographic data. You can also upload a MARC file, and the new one is this one, Upload Spreadsheet. Now, if you come to this and have a new purchase order and you want to upload a spreadsheet, you first have to have a spreadsheet to upload. Okay, under the View option, there is a download spreadsheet in Excel and another option in CSV that you can download and fill in. Let me show you what that spreadsheet looks like. Takes a minute for it to open up. And it does come in protected view, so if you're going to use it, you need to enable editing, and then I would actually save this to my hard drive before I entered anything in, so I had the template available always. And these are the fields that are available to enter into the purchase order. Now, if you already use a spreadsheet to generate lists of what you want to order, this will be a very simple thing for you to do. You just need to make sure you have the header line in and that the data under each header line is the data that you want to be in that field. If you don't have this and you think that it might not be useful, you can ignore the whole thing about the spreadsheet. But if you want to practice or experiment with using it, you can certainly do that. Let me see. Oops. There are pros and cons, but it all has to center around what your workflow is and how you're doing it. When I do the testing that I do in the sandbox, I tend to always use search because I don't want to type a lot because I end up correcting a lot of typing errors. At least if I bring it in from a search, I can be certain that it's going to be in the vendor's database with that same data, especially ISBNs, because that's a lot of numbers to type correctly for me. So that is the first thing that is on that spreadsheet that you just saw, and let me try and get back to it. I did it. Okay, so that one is there, and you can read the rest of the text in this spreadsheet, both in column E, and then I believe I added, I have my panel that I can't see behind, but I think in column H I listed the column names that need to be in the spreadsheet. Okay, and let me move back. Oh, I also wanted to mention this, that I know that you've seen this in the release notes before, but all of the get it fixes and enhancements and new features, etc., are kept in a separate section at the beginning of the document. So what I wanted to do is to identify for you which ones are acquisitions. So I added this ACQ after them. Once you get down to the regular Bibliovation pieces, it just has the word enhancement, fix, or new feature. On this tab, there are no new features in here, so that's what is each new. Also, in Bibliovation, question? I heard talking, but I couldn't decipher the words. Okay. Okay, let me go down to line number 13. This is an enhancement, and this particular one was something that was initiated by PTFS, but they did a number of fixes about the table indexes for borrower first and last names. I know that there's been some issues with retrieving some borrowers' names. So if you do some testing in the sandbox, see if the names that you have trouble with in production finding are easier to find in the sandbox. If it is, we can ask to have this point release moved over into production, but at the present time, there's no intention of moving this into production quickly. So we'll just, I'll look to you to tell me whether or not you want to have this on production or not. There are two new system preferences under admin. There's one that is added message delivered expire days and message pending expire days. And both of these are defaults that will automatically remove old delivered and undelivered messages from the patron record. If you have to keep all of the old messages for some reason, your administration wants you to keep that, you would have to set the system preferences to 0. Let's see. Let me come back over here. And under admin, there are these two new system preferences. And you'll notice I didn't do anything in these fields. They come preset to 30 days and to 90 days. If you want them to be fewer days, you can change it to fewer days, but keep in mind if you set it to 0, they'll never go away. Okay, I'm not sure if any of you have separate vendor files for acquisitions and serials vendors. If you do, this next one on line 15 would be something you might want to look into. Again, it's another system preference that would be under the serials tab in the system preferences area. And if that is something that that you're interested in, I would suggest that you go to the sandbox, to your sandbox, and do some testing with it. The next fix is line 18. This is something that a Waldo library reported as a problem, that the replace right to left function was missing, and that is now supposed to be fixed. So please test it out in the sandbox, and if it's now working in the sandbox, I would also suggest that you go back into the support center and add a note to the original support request saying that it works in the sandbox. That will just let LibLine know that it's been tested and it works. Okay, line 21, this is just an FYI. If any of you relied on the hold ratios report, you need to be aware that that's no longer there. It was not accurate ever from the beginning, and I think that those who tried to run it 9 or 10 years ago realized that it was not producing accurate results. And if it wasn't configured correctly, it could overload the database server and bring the system down. So they made the decision to report that or to delete that from the system. Now, as I said, the rest of the the rest of the entries on this particular tab are primarily fixes for South Central. If you see something in the sandbox, if you're just playing around that isn't working quite right, the way that you thought it was working, you might want to check here and see if it was something that was changed for South Central. And if it isn't on here, I would suggest entering a support center request as soon as possible. But this is where you can look to find out whether or not it's something that was changed for South Central. Any questions about the entries on this spreadsheet? Okay, let me go back to the agenda. And the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about are new granular permissions. Even though we've been dealing with these ever since we received the Bibliovation 6.0 in sandboxes and in production, I thought it might be a good idea to take a look at how things have changed in the permissions. And okay, that's not where I wanted to be. Okay, I don't know if you've looked at this yet, but I did send this out, and I wanted to make sure I could highlight things that were different. In the granular permissions column, I have sort of color-coded everything so that you know what was there. There are two sections or two colors I want you to pay attention to, and that's this really light orange and then the gray. The light orange ones are new preferences, new permissions that have been added to the granular permissions. And if you have user roles and you have something that is allowed that includes some of these new permissions, those are already available to your users. If you don't use roles and you have specific permissions checked on a user's permissions profile, there are things that you might want to choose to update. So the gray is deleted or not merged into the code. When I went through this, I discovered that pretty much all of the ones that are in gray were system preferences that were in South Central's LibLine version of Koha. and they were things that were either already in the permissions for those of us who were using LAK, or they were deemed not necessary in this version because something else was already providing that permission. Okay, so I'm going to, you can read through all of this yourself. I'm not going to go through each line and read them to you, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. The way that this spreadsheet is set up is that in this column C, which is granular permissions, these are, let me go back to, okay. The way that I set it up is so that each column would equal each column that was available here. So when we have the top one, circulate books, if there are any that have plus signs next to them, let me expand this and then go down here. There are a couple of pieces that have additional plus signs, and there are sub-permissions that are available. So you could choose that your staff member could view item history, or they could view and delete, or they could just delete. If you choose this issue history, they can do both. If you want to specify which ones are available to use, you can then go into this submenu to choose. And the way that I represented this in the spreadsheet was by moving it over into the next column, column D. So that's why these are set up this way. Let me come down here. Okay, there are a few differences in borrowers. And the one that I want to show you is, okay, in Edit Catalog, there is lots of differences. The primary difference, and I want to come down here to Authority Records, is that there are 3 new options that are available. So you can authorize a user to view authority records, to edit records, or to delete records. This all before was just under edit authority records. And this has been split out so that if you have, for example, reference librarians who would want to search in the authority file for headings, you could allow them to do that by choosing the view authorities. If you wanted to allow someone to enter a new authority record, you could certainly choose the edit. And of course, if you want to manage carefully who deletes records, you would then choose the delete. If it doesn't matter, you would just let the selection be. Okay, the part that is pretty much completely new on here, which should be no surprise, is the fees area, the update borrower charges. And there are more options that are available now for determining who can receive cash from your users, who can add additional fees to a borrower's record, who can transfer, waive fees, etc. So because the whole fee structure looks different, that was one of the first things that I had noticed is when they changed that, it made everything look a little bit different. And it was interesting to start figuring it out when the documentation wasn't there yet. So that's another area where you might want to look at, and you might want to allow your work study students or some of your clerks or technicians, whatever you call them, to do certain pieces, but not to do others. You can certainly go into either a roll record or into their patron record and make those selections. I also wanted to point out that acquisitions is now within the set of permissions. So in earlier versions of GetIt, all of the permissions were held within GetIt for the acquisitions functions. Now they are in the patron record permissions area. And I think that's all that I really wanted to highlight in this, but you can read through the spreadsheet and see where the changes are. Oh, the other one that had major changes was serials. Before there used to be an option to use serials, and that was perhaps all that I remember that was there, but now there are several different ones. Any questions about the spreadsheet or what you can refer to it about? Okay, I'm watching the chat looking for messages and I don't see any new ones, and I don't hear any questions. So I'm assuming that you're okay with this, that you can do whatever you want with this. It was just a way that I used in order to try and pull all of the permissions pieces into one document. Okay, and that's basically all that I have for today. The recordings will continue on YouTube, and our next meeting will be on January 30th. Before we end, I just want to ask, are there any questions or any other comments that you would like to make before we end? And I believe everyone is, well, most of you are unmuted right now, so you can just talk. And if you talk and you don't get any recognition, that means that you're muted.
I think Stephen had a question about whether libline would ever define the rest of the remaining circ permissions.
They can do that. I'll ask them to do that again. On the wiki, there is a page out there somewhere that does tell what the remaining circ permissions and the remaining borrower permissions meant. But I don't know if those are the same anymore. So I think I'll ask and see if there's a good way to do that. Actually, I'll put it in a support center ticket so you can all see if there's any response to it. I think that there's in the circ permissions as well as the borrowers. I don't recall any others, but I'll double check and see if there are.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
The email message about the top of the page navigation has already gone out.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, next time we meet again is January 30th, and I promise that I'll be a little bit better with the GoToMeeting then. And next time we'll play around with the attendees can draw a part. It's kind of fun. I've discovered I'm not very good drawing with a mouse. But I'm real good with an arrow. So that's all for today. I'll have the recording up this afternoon in a little while, and we'll talk again in 2 weeks. Thank you all.